it's where does inspiration come from? How do you find inspiration? I love, if it's not obvious, I love teaching martial arts, and I love a lot, most of what goes on in the dojo. There's some stuff that I don't like, but for the most part I love it. And yet sometimes it can get repetitive. You guys, sometimes you're in class and you're like, front punch, oh, we did this 2 weeks ago. I teach front punch every single day. I must rep front punch like 100 times a day between the different classes, not always with you guys, but I teach kids class, I teach little kids class, I teach daytime adult class, I teach nighttime adult class, and like it can get repetitive. It's necessary. If it weren't repetitive, if you didn't get the repetition of the technique, you would be bad at it forever. So it has to happen. And one time, Mo, one of our green sashes, he said to me, I think he may even put this in one of his papers for his test, but he said, I'm just amazed at how you teach, every time there's a brand new person in class, you teach the same class, and it's like you're so excited about it, and it's so inspirational to see you get excited about teaching the same class. And I said, well, it's not exactly the same class, but it's very similar. When there's somebody brand new in class, unless they have a lot of martial arts experience, they do the same basic stuff, the same basic techniques. I even talk about the techniques in the same way. And it's not because I'm lazy, it's because we actually have, we have this method to, getting people to sign up. It's like we say things in a way that makes them excited about practicing martial arts. And I do the same techniques that are something that they can actually handle. So they're not doing jump spinning crescent kicks, they're throwing reverse punches and nukites, simple stuff. And it's a measurable thing. If I change the class every time and somebody didn't become a student, then we'd wonder like, well, why didn't they sign up? Was it because the class you taught was stupid? Was it because Catherine did a terrible job? Like, what was it? So it's never my fault. I teach the same class every time. But it can be repetitive. I mean, imagine, I get somebody new in this class, a couple times a week, if not, some weeks we have somebody in here brand new almost every single day. And if I let that become this thing in my head, which most of our jobs become, which is like, oh, I gotta do this again, that would be terrible. And it would be terrible for me, but it would be terrible for you guys, and it would be terrible for the person who's coming in here trying martial arts for the first time. And that's unfortunately what they get at a lot of martial arts schools. If the person who's teaching has been teaching for a long time, a lot of times they kind of get uninspired. And so I have to find ways of getting inspiration for myself, and I inspire you guys. I should. If you're not inspired, wake up. Get inspired. One of the main ways that I get inspiration is by having you guys in here. If it were just me doing this by myself, it wouldn't be very exciting. But when I have somebody, especially brand new, coming in to the dojo, even somebody who has practiced martial arts before, but they haven't practiced martial arts the way that we practice it, the real way, the good stuff, then I love that, because it's like I'm starting all over again. And when I started, it was very exciting for me. I was super inspired. I came in there to Sifu Brown's school, and I saw, there were like 50 people in class, and everybody was just throwing smoke. And Sifu Brown gave us a very inspirational talk at the end of class called The 5 Ways of Becoming Great at Martial Arts. Maybe you've heard it before. I give that talk at the end of almost every single class that there's a beginner in. But when I heard Sifu Brown give that talk, I was like, wow, this is martial arts. And this man loves martial arts, and he loves teaching it. And I thought, that's what I want. And I kind of knew like right from the beginning that's what I wanted to do. And so I do that when I teach the class. And sometimes it's the same talk, the same class, but I get that this person is getting it for the first time. And I see it in their face. And I can feel it when somebody's really getting it. And I can feel it when somebody's not getting it. And that makes me just like bear down and go even harder. Like I double down on the inspiration. Or sometimes I just get louder and yell more. But that is one way that I get inspiration. Now, some of you might not have very repetitive jobs, but I'm assuming that most of you do. Like when you do a job, you end up having to do the same types of things over and over again, and that's good because you get good at it. And you get good at it, people want you to do it more. If somebody's not asking you to do the same thing, that means that you did a bad job and they don't want you to do it anymore. So do a good job and you'll get to keep doing it, you'll get better at it. That's what I get to do. And so maybe it's in your job, or maybe it's in your relationships, or maybe it's just in the rest of your life, but things might have a tendency to get kind of mundane or boring or repetitive. And you got to find ways to get excited, inspired. And I was looking for some inspiration for this talk today, and every once in a while I like to find some kind of like a scientific article that explains like, well, how does this happen with the brain, and where does this feeling come from a scientific level? Because I get where it comes from on like an emotional level or in my own experience. So I just Googled like, where does inspiration come from? And I see like a Harvard article about it. And I love reading a Harvard article because it's got some amount of, gravitas. And it's like, these people know what they're talking about. I started reading this article, and it was the least inspirational thing that I've ever read. I read like the first paragraph, and I just shut it down. I'm like, this is not going to work at all. This is not helping me. And one of the things that I got, though, from reading a few things was, like, when I think inspiration, I think of almost like you're being lazy, and you need the inspiration to get up off your butt and do something. Or things are feeling repetitive and boring, and you need to like get some excitement into it. But there's this other way of thinking about inspiration that I don't usually talk about or think of in this way, but it's like inspiration is in like being creative and like having the inspiration to come up with a new idea. And it's like when inspiration strikes you and you invent something, or you find a new way around a problem, a new solution. And that's great. That should be happening too. I want to talk a little bit more about the first way, which is like, how do you get excitement? How do you become, the way that you want to be to get things done? And so, like I said, I get it from you guys a lot. And I was talking about this topic at a seminar at the place where I teach Tai Chi once a week in Santa Monica at this business. And I was asked a question about like, how do you get inspiration? And one of the things that I started talking about was watching kids. And if you see a 5-year-old kid come in and do martial arts, they are like the most excited thing ever. A kid is usually excited about whatever they're doing. And martial arts is just like the most exciting thing. Every once in a while, I'll get a kid whose parents dragged him in, and they're like so nervous that they just stand there as they got so excited that they're just like frozen. And they don't know what to do, and they literally just stand there as I'm counting, and all the other kids are throwing techniques. But usually, the kid is just totally willing to dive in and be terrible, and just try and not care about messing up. And a kid gets that, they get to keep that for a couple of years until they start to become kind of like a teenager, or like, 11, 12, and then they lose it, and then they start becoming super self-aware, and then they're like, everybody's watching me, and I don't want to mess up. So then they are either like back to standing here like this, or they'll like pretend that they're not really trying hard in class, and they'll just like try to be super cool, and the inspiration's kind of gone. So don't watch teenagers for inspiration. Watch 5-year-olds. 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds especially. They are just on fire. And when I see them in class, I might have a kid in the front row, like a laser beam focus, throwing clean, hard technique, or I might have a kid in back who does not know what in the world they're doing, and they're supposed to be right foot in front, they have the left foot in front. They're supposed to be throwing their right hand, and they're throwing their left foot, and like they're supposed to be facing this way, and they're like facing the wrong direction. But they're still loving it. And there is this way of being that children get naturally, which is what we want to try to emulate through our practice, which is just being like a beginner, being an infant, having this beginner's mind. And it's like if you see that we're throwing a front punch and the first thing you say to yourself is, oh, front punch again, then you lost it. If the first thing you say is, oh yeah, I know how to do a front punch, then you lost it. You lost the opportunity to learn something. So you want to be like an infant seeing something for the first time, or like that 5-year-old walking into a martial arts class for the first time and they're just like this the whole time, everything that I say and do and everything that the other kids say and do, and just literally they walk on the mats and they're like, what is this? Like, it's all exciting. And if you can be like you were, all of you were like that as kids. I promise, none of you at 5 years old would have walked into a martial arts class and just been like, oh, front punch. You would have just been jumping out of your uniform from excitement. So you got to be able to take that into everything else that you do as well. You know, if you're, I don't know, you work in a cubicle. I'm sure one of you here works in a cubicle, and you sit there at your chair and there's a computer in front of you and you're in like a gray cube. And if you sit there and you're like, this again, and I'm just like typing on my computer and this is my life every day, I hate it, then that's not going to be very inspirational. But if you imagine what it were like if you were a 5-year-old kid and you walk in there and you sit in the chair and you're just like, this chair is awesome, and you just like spin around in it. You're like, I get to use a computer, this is great. And like literally just typing on the computer is fun. I don't mean that you just act like an idiot and don't get any work done, but I mean like, you know, get some of that. So you can just literally spend time around kids, or think of what you would be doing if you were like that, and practice this. We have to practice that. In class, we actually practice this kind of mindset, beginner's mind. And it's like you watch a baby playing with blocks, wooden blocks, the most boring possible thing. It's literally just it's a piece of wood. And the baby is just so enthralled by this. But the baby is also not attached. So this is where inspiration dies oftentimes, is we become attached to something. Maybe it's attachment to the idea that I already know about this, or maybe it's, you know, some other kind of attachment that takes us out of the moment. Attachment does that. It takes us out of the moment. So when we can be totally present right here, right now, like playing with this block is the most amazing thing ever. And then when I see over here, I don't know what else kids play with, like a squeaky toy. I guess that's animals, but like whatever else you see. There's a blankie. You play with a blankie. It's the most amazing thing. It's like underneath it, and it's incredible. The kid's not under the blanket thinking about, man, I wish I was playing with those blocks right now. They're not aware of the blocks. They're only here, now, present. So that last class that we did, which was, you know, you have to wait for the count and then explode on the count, is all about being present. It's all about practicing that mindset of being here now. And if you're not attached to the past and you're not worried about the future, you're totally present, that's incredibly inspirational. You know, you can find inspiration in the mundane and whatever you do in life. If you can be like that, be like a kid. Another great way to get inspiration is to read something inspirational, or to watch an inspirational movie, or talk to somebody inspirational. So I chose Way of the Peaceful Warrior. I hardly ever talk about this book, even though honestly this is the book that made me want to practice martial arts. I read it when I was 17 years old, I think, and it was given to me by my friend Michael Anuzis, who is practicing Kung Fu with Sifu Brown. And he said, this is one of the books that Sifu has at the school, you should read it, it's great. And I read it and I was like, oh, this is what we're going to do, that's amazing. So I'll skip to some of my favorite quotes towards the end. If you guys haven't read this, it's great, you should read it. It's a novelized kind of summary of kind of a mixture of Eastern and Western philosophy, but the main character, the protagonist, is Dan Millman, kind of writing as himself. And he meets this fictional character, Socrates. So one day Socrates, this is Dan remembering that there was an incident where Dan, he says, I had been acting lethargic. Socrates suddenly grabbed me and shook me. Wake up! If you knew for certain that you had a terminal illness, If you had little time left to live, you would waste precious little of it. Well, I'm telling you, Dan, you do have a terminal illness. It's called birth. You don't have more than a few years left. No one does. So be happy now without reason, or you never will be at all. He kind of expands on that a few pages later. And this is after Dan is kind of finishing his time with Socrates, and he's going out into the rest of his life. He says, so what do I do now? Where do I go from here? Who cares, he yelled gleefully. A fool is happy when his cravings are satisfied. A warrior is happy without reason. That's what makes happiness the ultimate discipline. Above all else, I have taught you, happiness is not just something you feel, it's who you are. And so this book is chock full of little quotes like that, but it's what we surround ourselves with and what we feed into our brains is definitely going to impact who we are on a day-to-day basis. And if you are reading things that are inspirational and exciting to you, or you're reading trash, that's what you're going to get. And I think that there is a huge problem in our society, in the world really, reality TV and a bunch of other stuff that's on TV, but it's like the stuff that we are bombarded with, and some of it we choose to feed ourselves with, and some of it we don't. It just happens to us. That really leads us to be the way that we are. And so if you can decide, like, I'm not going to read that magazine, I'm going to pick up something that's really going to inspire me, and I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it every day. If you're filling your mind with this stuff, that's what's going to come out. That's what's going to show up in your life. And when you hear something like this, be happy without reason, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be happy without reason. I'm just going to do it. You might have it for a moment, and then you might lose it. That's the nature of inspiration. It like catches us up, and it brings us to a state that we're not used to, and then it's gone. It's just like in meditation. When we sit, we can get really calm, we can get peaceful, we can get to that moment of clarity, and then as soon as we recognize it, it's gone. So you have to keep doing it, keep reading it, or turn it into some kind of practice. Make something that is consistent in your life. Find a consistent way to become inspired. And a lot of you get that from coming to the dojo and just being in class and being in the energy of a class, or hearing me talk, or being around each other, and all of that is great. Imagine if you did that, once a month, and then you went out into the world and you just let the world, suck all of your energy out. You wouldn't be in the same state that you are when you get to come to class regularly. So do that. Or maybe it's from reading or watching something inspirational, or having people in your life who inspire you. Or maybe it's just like watching kids or imagining what it's like. But you got to be consistent with it, because it's so fleeting. So like all of you, I am positive, have a daily meditation practice. And you meditate at least a couple of minutes, maybe 20, 30 minutes. Maybe some of you meditate for a whole hour every day. Great. However you do it, for however long it is, it's every day. Okay. So you brush your teeth every day. You shower every day. You better shower every day, after class especially. You meditate every day. And you got to find something that inspires you every day. It is not the way that we think of inspiration. We think of inspiration as something that like happens to us by accident. And it's like I'm reading this thing and something jumps out at me and grabs me, right? Or I'm just walking down the street and I see something, or I have an experience that inspires me. And to think about making it a habit, to think about making it a daily practice, almost seems to take the magic out of it. But if you don't do that, then you're just at the whim of life. in the world, and whatever happens to you is going to determine how inspired you are. Like Socrates says, how happy you are. You have to be happy for no reason. You have to be inspired for no reason. Don't just wait for something cool to happen to you. Go out and make something cool happen, or get it wherever you can get it. So we're going to sit and meditate, and as you're sitting to meditate, you obviously can't sit there and just think about inspirational things, because that's not meditation. But a great way to find inspiration, and the most important way, is within you. So from meditation, you might get to a state of bliss, to a state of just, happiness that bubbles up within you. Great. Maybe not. Maybe what you find is a moment of clarity. And then from that moment of clarity, you can come out of meditation and ask yourself, how am I going to be inspired today? How am I going to inspire myself? Or ask yourself, how can I inspire other people? Because there are other people who are counting on you to be that for them, just like they are for you. And find a way to make it consistent. Sit comfortably.